y'all. Okay, we're about to talk about the bureaucracy. This is kind of like interest groups. It's one of those things that's super important. You would not get this information anywhere else. I can't think of another class where you would see this compilation of information, but it is not the sexiest information. I am going to make my way through it. I am going to try to make it as interesting as possible, and I'm probably going to do that by talking about scandals and telling stories. That's the way we're going to make our way through this. So we're going to first start talking about the members of the of the executive branch that are elected. So now this is E.J. Davis's fault. E.J. Davis was able to pick his own cabinet. The United States is able to pick his own. He gets to decide who all of the leaders of the departments are going to be, as Attorney General, so on and so forth. But E.J. Davis, they felt, abused this power, and this power was taken away from the governor. And this is true of a lot of southern states. A lot of southern states are set up this way, where they actually have the most important positions elected separately from the governor. They run in their own elections and could theoretically be a different party from the governor. And in some states, that is exactly, they'll have a Democratic lieutenant governor and a Republican governor, or the other way around, and it leads to all kinds of interesting things. So we're going to start with the lieutenant governor. We're real familiar with the lieutenant governor because the primary job of the lieutenant governor is to work in the legislative branch. So we talked about the legislative branch and the tremendous power that the lieutenant governor wields in chapter 7. But the lieutenant governor is actually and technically like the vice president is. So it is as a part of the executive branch. If the governor leaves the state temporarily, or if the governor resigns or gets impeached or passes away, the lieutenant governor goes into that spot automatically. And the lieutenant governor serves as the chair, and there's some Latin. Ex officio just means because of the office. Because he is lieutenant governor, he is the chair of several boards and commissions: legislative budget board, legislative council, and one real big one that's going to be coming up next year is the legislative redistricting board, because we just had a census. So redistricting board does the redistricting if Congress doesn't get around to it, and I suspect they will not. Then there is the Attorney General. This is the chief legal officer for the state. Oh, by the way, our Lieutenant Governor is a guy named Dan Patrick. Our Attorney General is a guy named Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton, here I go with the gossip. Ken Paxton is under indictment. Ken Paxton just had a big letter that came out from members of his office. Quite a few people resigned and said that he has been misusing money and abusing power as Attorney General, but yet and still, he is still our Attorney General. He barely beat the Democrat last go round, because he was under indictment when he ran for Attorney General, but he's there. He's there. So the job of the Attorney General is to interpret the Constitution. The Attorney General also issues legal opinions about application of state law. The Attorney General represents the state in civil and criminal litigation, so really has nothing to do with criminal like anything that has to do with the criminal law as it applies to the people of the state of Texas. But if if the state is filing criminal charges, then the Attorney General's office is going to represent the state, and the Attorney General will review any law or application of the law and issue what is called an Attorney General's opinion. And we treat, until there is a court case or a new law is passed, we treat the Attorney General's opinion on how this law should be applied just like law. They're cited in court cases all the time. The Attorney General's office does, if you go to that website, they do child support enforcement. They do antitrust law. And so there are local Attorney General's offices all over the state. And when John Cornyn, he's now a senator, when John Cornyn was Attorney General, they instated a rule that said that if a person is getting any kind of assistance from the state, anything, unemployment, WIC, Medicare, food stamps, now called SNAP, that the Attorney General's office was going to intervene and make sure that there was not somebody that was supposed to pay child support. So they automatically file a child support paternity claim if there is not one already in place, to try to offset some of the money that a person is going to get by collecting child support. So they are very active. And I know in Tarrant County, the Attorney General's office intervenes on any child support case. So if there is a divorce or that comes from family court, the Attorney General's office will monitor the child support order for the rest of the time that the child is under 18. So they are a super, super busy department within the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office has almost 4,000 employees. Then we have I think you pronounce this controller, y'all. Honestly, it's supposed to be controller. But where this is Texas, we call it the comptroller. The comptroller of public accounts. This is the chief financial officer. And when I say chief financial officer, the comptroller certifies how much money the state has to spend, puts money aside. We have something that's called the rainy day fund. And so of all the money that we collect, a certain percentage of it gets socked away, so that if we ever have a budget shortfall or have an emergency, we have that money saved there. And I suspect that they're going to be dipping into the rainy day fund this go round. I know that they told all community colleges that they needed to cut their budgets by 5% after we had the COVID outbreak. So we're expecting heavy cuts across the board. The one thing that is required of the state of Texas, this is in the Texas Constitution, is that we have to balance our budget. We have to balance our budget. So we can't borrow money. We can't spend more money than we have. Only in an emergency, upon approval of 4/5 of both the House and Senate, can the state of Texas borrow money. We have never done it. Never done it. We get in there, we balance that budget. When we have budget shortfalls, they pass legislation and dip into the rainy day fund. The comptroller also looks at any appropriations bill and says, yeah, we have enough money for that. So certifies any bill that comes across out of the legislature that has to do with money and says, yep, if this bill gets passed, then we have enough money in our budget to pay for that. The comptroller also keeps, how do I say it? Escheat, ESCHEAT. Basically, if somebody has some money that they know belongs to someone else, instead of just holding on to it for years, they send it to the comptroller's office so that they can get it off their books. They don't have to worry about it anymore, and the comptroller holds it. And if a person applies for it, and can verify that they are the person that owned that money, then the comptroller's office will send that money to you. Y'all, go to the Texas Comptroller's office, or just type in state money held by state, put in your name, and make sure that they're not holding your money. Banks that close a bank account because you never came back and you put some money in there. Utility companies that required a deposit and you never got it, you moved. Um, um, what am I trying to say? Like apartments that houses that you rent and you put down a utility deposit, or you put down a deposit and never got it back. I remember I have always gone and looked and put my name in. I had some money because I had done some work for the county, some court appointment work, and then I closed my office and shut down my post office box. So the post office, of course, sent the check back to them. And so they ended up sending it to the comptroller's office. So I had some money that was sitting there. I always have at least one student that finds that there's some money. There was, I think it was oil and gas. It was a gas lease, that the young man's father never agreed to, but they were able to get the lease done anyway. So there was some money that was coming to them, and so it was like $4,000. So go check the comptroller's website and make sure that there's not some money in your name or your family's name, um, because that's where it is. Fill out the form, get your money. Oh, another elected position in Texas is the agriculture commissioner. And our agriculture commissioner is a guy named Sid Miller, always wears a cowboy hat and always in some kind of controversial trouble, just always saying stuff that he's not supposed to. Sent out a tweet from the official agriculture commission website about Hillary Clinton calling her a bad name. He's just always in something. But their job, there is a requirement that the commissioner of agriculture be a farmer. I guess you just have to say it. I don't think that they go and check. That person is in charge of promoting the agriculture in the state, licenses, and is in charge of, what am I trying to say? Pesticides and investigating pesticides that have to do with agriculture. So they regulate the agriculture industry. They also take complaints against the agriculture industry. So sometimes people say that sometimes people say that the agriculture commissioner has a conflict of interest, because how do you represent people and take complaints? Land commissioner. Our land commissioner is one George P. Bush. If that sounds familiar, it should. He is the nephew of George W. Bush and the grandson of George H.W. Bush. He is an attorney that grew up in Florida, and he is his mother. If you've ever seen George, if you've ever seen Jeb Bush, Jeb Bush ran for president on the Republican ticket, and but if you've never seen his wife is of Mexican descent. She is super pretty, and George P. Bush got all of his mom's genes. You can tell that he's a Bush, but he's a looker. Go look up George P. Bush, our land commissioner. And so what the land commissioner does is manages rentals and leases of state-owned land, and the state of Texas owns a lot of land. And some of those the oil and gas companies have leases on, and so that is another source of revenue for the state. And the land commissioner also regulates the Veterans Land Board, and so gives low interest loans for land to veterans in the state of Texas. I'm telling you, he's cute. Let's talk about appointed executives. So these are people that are not elected. They are appointed by the governor. So this is a list of people that are appointed directly by the governor. Of course, any of these people have to be approved by the Senate. So one of them is the Secretary of State. A lot of states elect their secretaries of state, but not Texas. Secretary of State is in charge of elections. So right now, the Secretary of State's office is on 100 because they are moving very fast. They manage the voter registration rolls. They work very closely with counties. They fund elections. And so on the Secretary of State's website, you can go to see if you're registered to vote. You can go to see what precinct you're in. If there's any issues with your voter registration, the Secretary of State's website will house all of that information. Secretary of State is also in charge of all business licenses. So if you are going to incorporate or form a limited partnership, you pay your fees and get your articles of incorporation or limited partnership papers from the Secretary of State's office. Adjutant General, we talked about earlier, is the head of the military, and that person of the state military, state National Guard, and the National Guard and the State Guard, and that Adjutant General is appointed to 2-year terms. Secretary of State is 4. The Adjutant General is appointed to 2-year terms directly by the governor. The governor also appoints the commissioner of the Department of Health and Human Services. Department of Health and Human Services is a huge department in the state of Texas because they administer, not only do they administer any food related or health related entitlement programs like Medicaid and SNAP. They also are in charge of any health services. So MHMR, Child Protective Services, or I think they call it Department of Protective Services now. It used to be CPS. Any state-run care facilities, and our state mental hospitals are all under the Department of Health and Human Services. Then there's the insurance commissioner.